America's role on the world stage is changing with a whole different approach to foreign policy. Today we talk with former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Joel Rubin, author of the briefing book about everything from peace in Ukraine and the Middle East to peace of mind, about what American taxpayers are currently spending overseas. From Ballard Studios in Washington, D.C., it's 13th and Park.
The hard things that are necessary, we either do it or we'll pay the price down the road.
That often is missing in politics.
We have to solve everything.
It's a nightmare.
You and I can differ, but that doesn't mean you and I cannot be friends.
I have faith in the American people.
Those are the facts.
The Illuminati, right there. Aliens could have invaded and nothing would surprise me at this point.
We went from North Korea to M&M. That's a lot, man.
What's in this tea?
Well, Joel, great to have you on the show. We were talking before the show about your mixed partisan credentials. You work with Republican presidents. You work with Democratic presidents. That gives you a unique perspective. So we're going to talk today about three of the things that have all of America talking. And we'll start with Israel. Obviously, things changed dramatically after the attack October before last. There is a ceasefire agreement in play, hopefully a second one to follow. Where are we in all that?
Well, Adam, it's wonderful to be with you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about all these important issues. And it is real time, right? Today we'll talk and tomorrow could be different.
Right.
And frankly, on Israel, it may be because it looks like the negotiating team is now heading out to Qatar, to Doha, to meet with their counterparts from the Qatari government. And so, President Trump right now, I think he's got mixed results so far from his actions. About a month ago, he, alongside Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel, announced that it was time for everybody to leave Gaza, which didn't really land well in the region or amongst Palestinians and really was seen as impractical by the body politic of Israel as well. During that time, the ceasefire that he supported at the end of Biden's term, that was coming to a sort of conclusion. It's multi-phased. And on March 1st, that actually ended. So the first phase of that ceasefire, where a number of hostages were released in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, that continues, but nobody's being released and no aid is going in. And so Witkoff and his team are trying to figure out if there's a step forward. Over the weekend, there were discussions about the American hostages as well. And so I'm not sure what the total vision is. And I'm also not sure where Israel fits into these negotiations right now, because the prime minister is also facing tremendous heat from his coalition partners on his right flank, who don't want any of this. Right. They want to go back to war. They think that the only way to deal with Hamas is to eliminate them militarily. And of course, they do like the Trump plan. So there's a lot of factors at play. And at the end of the day, the hostage families are suffering. The Israeli people are suffering. The Palestinian people are suffering. And we do need a diplomatic path forward. And I hope that we'll get some clarity over the next couple of days about what that looks like.
You think the two-state solution is in a pause right now? I know that's something that you've been advocating, when you were part of J Street, where you were the political director at one point. It doesn't seem like this is the moment, but does that come back into play?
Frankly, I think the two-state solution right now is a complete non-starter of a discussion. Yeah. I remember a time, I'm sure you do too, when there was a Prime Minister Rubin in Israel who was trying to get there, and a Prime Minister Perez who was trying to get there, and lots of discussions over the years. And when I was at J Street, part of what we were trying to do was deal with the politics here in Washington in the United States and say there is a constituency for peace, a constituency for an agreement. From my perspective, peace is an existential need for the state of Israel's long-term survival. So I come at it from a very pro-Israel mindset, which is secure borders. That is going to be secure when you have agreements, just like with Jordan and Egypt for Israel. But I don't think that's really anybody's discussion right now.
The Trump administration recently said to Colombia, we're taking away some of your marbles. They're talking about $400 million of federal funds, right? And it's not just Colombia. There are others that are on the potential list because of perceived anti-Semitism. We're both Jewish. And I can tell you, when I saw some of the scenes of the protests in some of the campuses last year, it was upsetting. And I could see, as a Jewish student, how they would feel very unsettled and very unwelcome. And I thought that there was more, frankly, that college administrations could have done in making certain things clear. You have to call for what it is, right? As opposed to trying to please everyone against the middle. In this case, the Jewish students on these campuses were in the middle, have been in the middle. What do you think of all that?
You rightly called it perceived anti-Semitism, and I frankly will say it was anti-Semitism. The harsh attacks against Americans who are Jewish just because a country called Israel was engaged in a defensive war against an organization that committed a grave atrocity against its citizens should remind everybody about what the focus was. The focus was on making these Jewish students feel outside of civil society, to feel banished from being part of the community, to be intimidated into silence in their support of Israel. And as someone like me who has worked in the progressive side of Jewish politics and foreign policy, on October 7th, I was watching online as the murders were taking place inside of Israel and having a conversation with another progressive leader. And I said to her, my God, these attacks are horrifying. And she was quiet. And I said, they're killing women. And she was quiet. I said, they're killing civilian women. She said, well, you know, Joel, they're all soldiers anyways.
Right.
And that has not disappeared from my thought process. I have daughters. I have 3 teenage daughters. One is a freshman now in college. Friends of mine got mad at me when I said that the presidents of these colleges should be fired. And they said, why would you say that? I said, well, because I'm Jewish. American Jews, we're fortunate. We're blessed to be in this country. And we have to make sure that when there is hate taking place, we call it out. Now, we call it out in a lot of different directions. As an American Jew, on the Democratic side, I've been proud to be calling out hate against other groups. In the days after the murders in Israel, this terrorist attack, there was silence amongst the groups with whom I partnered for years. And that really sticks with you. And so what happened to Columbia this last week, you know, I didn't advocate for President Trump on the campaign trail. I advocated for Kamala Harris, but I'm also an American who likes to ensure that we have a government that works for us. And I think that he made the right call. One of the frustrations that I had over the past year plus is seeing a lot of good words about fighting anti-Semitism, but not a lot of actions. And so now universities are going to have to take care of their students when they feel intimidated and harassed on campus.
Yeah, because as the proverbial saying went, you know, silence in the face of wrong is no virtue, right? Let's shift to USAID, right? Foreign aid. Let me read you something that was just published by a columnist in The Hill. The author wrote, what had once functioned as a humanitarian lifeline has become a labyrinth of misallocated resource, favoring broad, abstract development theories over measurable results. This shift has diluted accountability, misdirected funding, and allowed wasteful programs to flourish under the banner of long-term, unverifiable goals. Now, there's a laundry list the Trump administration has put out of programs that on the face of it are very dubious, right? As opposed to those I'm sure have incredible worth. But you can understand, I think, the question that this function of government has grown to the point where it is now, where the perception, if not the true reality, is it's not as efficient as it should be. And Americans are starting to react like, what gives?
You know, the hardest thing always in the development community, there are long-term benefits that are not seen in the immediate moment that over time play out. I went on a trip about a decade ago when I was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs. So I was I was the lead person for Secretary Kerry handling the House of Representatives. And I went on a congressional delegation trip, a CODEL, down to Latin America, a bipartisan delegation led by Chairman Ed Royce at the time and Ranking Member Elliot Engel, 7 members there. It was a really fascinating, enjoyable trip. Smart people. Ted Yoho was there. Ted testified recently about USAID. I mean, a real good mix. And we went there, and I'll never forget, we went to Colombia, and we went deep into the jungle. And we went and we saw coca labs that basically were being eradicated. And then we met with farmers from the area who had been, in the past, harvesting cocaine basically to export to the United States, who no longer were doing that. Why? Because USAID was paying them as well as teaching them on how to do productive agriculture and other crops. At that exact moment, we did not see a dollars and cents benefit, but as part of the broader Plan Colombia, which started in 2000, shifting the incentives of farmers away from drug production to crop production. There are a lot of problems with the programs. And when President Trump listed off the programs at that speech a week or so ago, I was cringing. It's like, oh, a lot of those programs I wouldn't want to justify. But the point of foreign aid, I do want to make sure I'm clear on this. It is crucial for us to project power that is not just blunt military force, but that is building partnerships, that is lifting people up, that is cultivating alliances and relationships over time. They call it soft power. I just call it power, but it's power of our ideas and our money and our assistance. And we have great relationships around the world because of this. And now my fear is by pulling it out and pulling it out in a very rigid way, not only are we pulling the plug on programs that build relationships for us and potentially causing humanitarian disasters, the spread of Ebola could resurface, AIDS could resurface in Africa, but we're also leaving the playing field open. And so our adversaries, China in particular, are going to say, great, all these countries now, they feel abandoned, they need money from someone, we're going to give it to them and take the lead.
This will predate you, but there was a former senator from Wisconsin, William Proxmire, who came out with the Golden Fleece Awards, where he would identify inexcusable, inexplicable waste in government, like the proverbial $10,000 toilet seats, right? He was known for that well past his years of service. I think what the Trump administration seems to be saying is, let's take a look at everything with fresh eyes, right? Mm-hmm. And it might look like it's draconian, and it's like, oh, we're taking everything out and we're putting nothing back, as opposed to the USAID. They came in, they said, let's freeze everything. Of course, some programs said if you freeze everything, you're ending it, right? But the idea of taking another look and seeing if things are still right. And to your point, it's interesting, your description of power, whether it really is directly in our self-interest to be doing this.
Right. And, I want to get into this conversation because I think it's so important for people when they're listening to and think about what's going on inside Washington. I'll put on my process hat. I've been here for 25 years, roughly. I entered government in the late 90s, and there were two things that stick out about that time that are relevant to what we're discussing. First is GPRA, the Government Performance and Results Act, which was basically the legislative governing structure of how we spend money in a more efficient manner. Throughout the 90s, the Clinton administration, Al Gore led that. And I remember entering government and GPRA was everywhere because we had to be very tight with our money. All of these ideas are relevant and necessary. But what I'm really concerned about is that Congress is being pushed to the side. Congress is the body that makes decisions about appropriations. Constitutionally, that is their mandate. If there is waste, fraud, and abuse, if there are bad programs, all of these programs up until now were approved by Congress and signed into law by a president. If you want to take them back, change them, retract them, you have to get Congress to approve it as well. So I really think that to get political legitimacy for these efforts in cost cutting, it's essential for the president and Elon Musk and his team to have a package that they send to Congress that can be debated as a bill and passed and signed into law by the president to make real structural change. Because right now, it's in the courts. Like, that's no way to run a government, back and forth ping-ponging the courts, say yes, no. We need real reform. I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with finding ways to reduce funding, but it can't be done unilaterally. We did not have a God-king dynamic in American politics. We have a deliberative system that has balance of power, checks and balances. Congress needs to be part of this. But I think it's beyond necessary to identify when there are problems.
So Ukraine.
Yeah.
One of the things that could actually happen is peace, that wonderful word, right? And obviously, the President of the United States would like nothing better than to petition the Nobel Committee
I think
in years to come as a great peacemaker, right? Is what the president has done in trying to ensure that both, in this case, Vladimir Putin and President Zelensky come to the table, as opposed to continuing to fund military expenditures, continuing to see the war-ravaged nation become even more ravaged, and maybe opinions become more divided.
Well, there are a lot of different ways to think about this in terms of motivations and whatnot. I'm going to look at the world as I see it right now. I applaud President Trump for putting out there the idea that there needs to be an end to this fight, that this war needs to stop. I do think, though, with the reaction we saw last week where Vladimir Putin, just a day or so after we withdrew intelligence sharing with the Ukrainians, Putin launched a massive missile assault. I think that should be a warning sign to Donald Trump. He should see, oh yeah, this guy actually is not acting in great faith either. Don't just assume that he wants peace, because I frankly think he's the aggressor and he needs to be treated as such. So bring the boom on him too. Push the sanctions that you were talking about last week onto him. You got Zelensky's attention. You got the Europeans' attention.
No question.
And I mean, they are all aflutter, right? It is a different dynamic. That's fine. But Putin shouldn't feel that he has the ability to right the peace deal himself.
Right.
And I think that's where the balancing back needs to occur. But this war has been a decade ongoing, 3 years in the most intense phase. It is a calamity for Europe. Europeans have legitimate security fears about what Russia's overall intentions are. Anything that is done, I still say, just like with Congress, the stakeholders need to have a vote. And the stakeholders in this case are NATO, broadly speaking, the Europeans, of course, the Ukrainians. They all need to be at the table. Ultimately, we cannot create a situation where it's just the U.S. and Russia agreeing on what it will look like and then say we have peace. That won't be peace. That will just be a pause and then a recalibration, then a return to fighting later. So I implore the negotiators as they go down this road of looking for an end to this war, which again is laudatory and the right goal, they need to make sure that those who are affected by it are truly brought into this process.
If we had a stronger NATO and European Union doing more, not less, in terms of their own defense, right? We had Ukraine at peace, maybe having lost some land in negotiation with Russia. Russia withdraws, so they stop killing people, and maybe their reward is some piece of land.
That would be the optimal outcome. Yeah. That would be the optimal outcome, because what we can't do and should not ever engage in is contemplating regime change and getting rid of this leader and somehow a new leader will come out. That will be the world as it should be. I do want to emphasize security guarantees that Zelensky talked about. That matters, right? Like the Europeans and the Ukrainians can't always be looking over their shoulder wondering when, if Trump goes, because Putin is afraid of Trump, will he then come back in the next day? But the way you're outlining it, if that is achieved, that will be a major win.
Well, it's great to know that two Jews, coming from different parts of the spectrum, can agree on a number of things. And thanks again for presenting a more informed, kind of balanced look at things, because, too often, obviously these days, everyone is off in their own corner trying to fight it out with kind of one-dimensional blinkers on.
Honored to be with you. Thanks, Adam.
Take care of yourself.